Good morning, everyone, and thanks being for here for my PhD defense. Let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Wei Tong, and my supervisors are Professor Chris Hosh from the University of Savoie-Mont Blanc and Professor Yang Lijia from Liaocheng University. And I would like to thank the members of the jury, Professor Sylvain Dupuy from the University Sorbonne Paris Nord, and Professor An Xiaomi from the Renmin University of China, Professor Chen Jing from Nanjing University, and Dr. Maria Babadoupalou from the University of Savoie-Mont Blanc. And I would like to thank the China Scholarship Council for funding my thesis and my 3 years stay in France. My background is in computer science. I had a bachelor and a master's in computer science from the Liaocheng University. My PhD research focuses on the area of knowledge where ontology, terminology, and semantic web and linked data technologies for cultural heritage meet. Taozi project is my PhD project. It was launched between Liaocheng University and University Savoie in 2017 after receiving funding from CSC. The full title of my PhD dissertation defend here today is terminology and ontology for cultural heritage application to Chinese ceramic vases. The contents of my presentation include the following points. And first, the motivation that sparked the research topic of thesis and the research questions posed. Then a few words on the domain of Chinese pottery and on the objectives. Third, a few words on the series and the research map. Fourth, I will present discuss the methodology we used. Fifth, I will present the Taozi ontology website and e-dictionary. Last, I will say a few words on the conclusions and on the future work. And let us begin with the motivation and the research questions. And the first one, motivation is the motivation was forward. First, publishing open and linked data about the Chinese ceramic vases of the Ming and Qing dynasties. Heritage institution which not only to display objects and symbol descriptions draw from metadata, but also allow for understanding relationships between objects created by semantically interrelated metadata. And furthermore, on the domain of Chinese ceramic vases lacks knowledge representation models, ontologies to capture Chinese pottery concepts. And the second motivation is the challenge of building knowledge-based terminological resources for communication and knowledge sharing. Chinese characters can be a vehicle of meaning. They can bear meaning directly, linked to the domain knowledge reflecting the characteristics of ceramics. This thesis addressed the challenge of building knowledge-based terminological resources for communication and knowledge sharing in such a way to be open and linked on the web. Let me introduce the research questions of this thesis. The primary research question is what are the theoretical and methodological assumptions underlining the creation of an onto terminology in the domain of Chinese ceramic vessels. And more specifically, we include 4 specific questions. The first one is how to create a domain ontology of Chinese ceramic vases following the approach of onto terminology. Onto terminology is a specific approach of terminology relying on an ontological representation of the conceptual system. The second question is how to build multilingual terminological resources based on the domain ontology for experts and students' communication in the domain of Chinese ceramic resources. The third one is how to take into account the way of thinking of humanists in building terminology and conceptualization. The fourth is how to implement onto terminology in poetry, and in particular, how to express essential characteristics in poetry. Let us see the domain and the objectives. The domain focuses on the Ming and Qing dynasties of China, which were from 1368 to 1911. And the research objects are Chinese ceramic vases. The Ming dynasty ceramics were famous for the boldness of form and decoration and the varieties of design. The Qing dynasty porcelain was famous for its polychrome decorations, delicately painted landscapes and bird and flower, as well as multicolor enamel designs. The objects were selected based on the following set of criteria. Let us recall the main goal of the thesis is not to populate an ontology of Chinese ceramics, but to define an ontology and a terminology of those vessels. These objects should be as much as different as possible from one another, and prototypically of their class should be come from well-known collections of ceramic vessels in China, and the information about them should be publicly available and precise enough for building an ontology. And the objects come from the collections in China, and Palace Museum in Beijing. It includes 97 objects, and the National Museum of China in Beijing, it's 22 objects. Guangdong Museum in Guangzhou is 24 objects, and Shanghai Museum in Shanghai is 4 museums, and Capital Museum in Beijing, it's 2 objects. Now I'm going to introduce the objectives of the thesis. The first one is to build a bilingual focus on Chinese and English terminological knowledge base in dictionary of Chinese ceramic vases for archaeologists and students. The The second one is to build an ontology to represent knowledge in the Chinese ceramic vase of Ming and Qing dynasties and publish these open linked data on the linked open data. The third one is to propose an approach for translating essential characteristics in ontology. The third one is to provide a reference for archaeologists, knowledge engineers, ontology engineers, and terminologists working on this domain. And the fourth is to enrich existing methodologies of building ontology by means of a terminology, by means of a term and characteristic guided approach, so as to reduce the dependence on logic and formal languages. The following part is about the serials and research map. The serials, our work is based on the ISO 287 and ISO 704 standards. Let us recall some definitions. A term is a verb designation of a general concept in a specific subject field. And a concept is a unit of knowledge created by a unique combination of characteristics. A characteristic is an abstraction of a property. Essential characteristic. Essential characteristic is a characteristic indispensable in order to understand the concept. This is the structure of the semantic web. Ontology, vocabulary, and RDF are the core of the semantic web. And this is the semantic web definition. And link data. The web of documents links documents through hyperlinks, but the web of data links data through semantic relationships. Presently, we are transferring from a web of documents to a web of data, and this is the definition of linked data. The research map is based on the hypothesis. It's a term is a verb designation of a concept, and terminology work includes two dimensions: linguistic dimension and conceptual dimension. So we divided the research map into the linguistic dimension and the conceptual dimension. The conceptual dimension focus on building a computational model ontology, and the linguistic dimension focus on the terms denoting concepts, and the definition of terms written in natural language relies on the formal definition of concepts. The last part is devoted to the application of the Taozi ontology to build a bilingual dictionary and a website. And the next section is about the methodology of the Taozi ontology. Now there are a lot of methodologies for building ontology. Ontology building follows a life cycle made up of several stages. Some of them have to be specialized, and others have to be introduced to take into account the specificities of the domain. The series of concepts underpinning the ontology can also strongly impact the building methodology. And following the ISO principles on terminology, where a term is a verb designation of a concept, and a concept is a unique combination of essential characteristics. We were led to adopt a term and characters guided methodology derived from works carried out in digital humanities at the LISTIC lab. And identifying essential characteristics becomes the main goal to achieve. This method, based on ISO 1087 standards, has the advantage to be close to the way of thinking experts, and to reduce the dependence in logic and formal languages. The workflow of this method is made up of 7 steps. In the following, I will introduce each of them. And step one. Step one is to identify the scope of the domain and objectives. The competency questions could be used in these steps. And step two is to identify terms and objects. It includes 2 tasks. We need to select the set of vases to study from different museums. The dataset has to represent the richness of the domain without being too big, because the primary goal of this project is to define the ontology and not to populate it. And the second one is to collect the set of terms corresponding to the selected vase. And the step 3 is to identify essential characteristics, and this step is important for our methodology. And we propose 2 approaches to reach this goal: an object point of view and a term point of view. The object point of view and is to identify the difference between objects according to their function. Here they are for decorative purpose, and their shape. The vase is divided into different parts. It's different parts based on the metaphor of the human body, such as lid, shoulder, belly, bottom, and mouth, and the rim of mouth, neck, handle, railing, and foot. Then we identify the difference for each of these parts. For example, the handle. For example, vase with handles or without handles. Vase with handles can be differentiated according to the shape of the handles. Dragon shape handles, pierced handles, and so on. And for example, the neck part of vase can be analyzed according to 3 axes of analysis: neck length, neck width, and the bending degree of the neck. For the neck length, it could classify the vase into long neck vase and short neck vase. So the long neck and the short neck are the essential characteristics. For the axis of analysis, neck width is gathered the essential characteristics wider neck and slender neck. The same as the bending degree of the neck, it includes the essential characteristics straight neck and bending neck. The term point of view is a morphological analysis of Chinese term. The term point of view consists in a morphological analysis of Chinese term whose characters directly express knowledge about the denoted objects. The Nanjing Museum adopts the following order of modifiers for naming ceramic: dynasty, killing, glaze, color, decoration, shape, texture, type. And a Chinese term is made up of a character. The rightmost character, which indicates the type of the denoted object, and preceded by other characters called modifiers, such as dynasty, killing, glaze, color, decoration, shape, and texture. They are called modifiers. And the information conveyed by the modifiers express the knowledge of different natures, either essential characteristic and descriptive characteristic, such as glaze and color. For example, the term 青雍正粉青釉突花如叶儿蒜头瓷瓶 conveys the descriptive characteristics of dynasty. It's Qing dynasty. Emperor is 雍正. Glaze color 粉青釉 power blue glaze, and decoration 突花 designed with flowers. And it also conveys the essential characteristics of handle, 如叶儿, shape is 蒜头, garlic-like head, and material, 瓷, porcelain, and type, 瓶 vase. So these are essential characteristics, and these are descriptive characteristics. The term, this term conveys the information for our building ontology. And step 4 is to define concepts based on essential characteristics under the term-guided approach. For example, the term garlic head vase denotes the following set of essential characteristics: vase, one mouth, garlic shape mouth, ring foot. And the name of the concept denoted by garlic head vase is built from the set of essential characteristics: vase, one mouth, garlic shape mouth, ring foot. So the term definition, the definition of the term garlic head vase is the translation in natural language of the formal definition of the concept: vase with a garlic shape mouth and ring foot. And another example is garlic head vase 1. which is a sub-concept of the Gaelic headwise, and the term Gaelic headwise 1 denotes the following sets of essential characteristics: Gaelic headwise, short neck, circle shoulder, roux-shaped handle, globular belly. And for this formal definition, the definition of the term Gaelic headwise 1 will be Gaelic headwise with the short neck and with the short neck, circle shoulder, roux-shaped handle, and globular belly. This picture is an example of Gaelic headwise 1. And step 5. Step 5 is to build ontology by tools. And there are two tools to building ontology: pottery and teddy. Pottery and teddy differ on many points that could be summarized by saying that the former is as universal and the latter is specific. Pottery is free open source software and the most widely used ontology editor, supported by a large community of users. But it relies on the description logic for the theory of concepts and on the W3C recommendation for representation languages. But it can't directly represent the essential characteristics in description logic, and linguistic dimension is reduced to annotations. And teddy is intended for experts to build onto terminology in accordance with the ISO principles on terminology. It relies on essential characteristics, linguistic dimension explicitly represented. In order to implement the ISO principles of terminology on pottery and to represent the essential characteristics on pottery, we selected pottery to develop ontology and post the corresponding relations between pottery and the term and characteristic guided method. And we propose the corresponding relations between pottery and term and characteristic guided method. Terms are expressed as label. Terms are expressed as a label, and the relations are represented object property. And concepts are translated as a named class in pottery. Objects correspond to individuals in pottery. And the descriptive characteristic they are translated either as data properties if their value is data letter or as object property, and classes if the value is an individual. Because the essential characteristic correspond to rigid predicates, they can't be directly expressed into description logics. So essential characteristics are expressed as classes. And we define essential characteristics as classes in order to be further partitioned if necessary. For example, the animal head handle could be further sub-partitioned as elephant head handle, dragon head handle, and tiger head handle. And owning an essential characteristic for a concept class is represented as a restriction of object property, whose range is the class associated to the essential characteristic. This means that the concept class is a subclass of the animals class, defined by the property restrictions. For example, the concept denoted by the term otherwise one includes the essential characteristics otherwise square mouth, slanting shoulder, body, belly, square foot. It will be represented as a subclass of otherwise has a component some square foot mouth, has a component some square foot, has a component some slanting shoulder, has a component some body's belly. And step 6 is integration. Step 6 is the integration stage. The Taozi ontology is linked to the following ontology. CDOC CRM is a formal ontology intended to facilitate the integration, mediation, and interchange of heterogeneous cultural heritage information. For example, the class vases is linked to the CDOC CRM class E22 man-made object, which comprise physical object property created by human activity. And the vases class is not the same with the E22 man-made object. And there are another ontologies such as Dublin Core and FOFO and OWL and RDFS and SCOS. OTC container is the namespace of the Taozi ontology. And evaluation. We use the two online platforms to query the ontology against the competency questions. The Taozi ontology was submitted to OPS, an online tool to detect some of the most common pitfalls appearing when developing ontologies. OPS has detected only minor pitfalls for the Taozi ontology. For example, P8, it's missing annotations, and P13, it's inverse relationships not explicitly declared. And the Taozi ontology was also submitted to the Ontometrics. Is an online platform to calculate more advanced ontology metrics. Most of the scores are very low. That's due to the implementation of essential characteristics in description logics. Essential characteristics are translated as classes without any attributes. So the attribute richness are low. And the main goal of the Taozi ontology is the classification of vases. neither to represent relationships between wines and other artifacts, relation richness, class relation zero, nor to populate the ontology with the individual's average population class richness. So this score is very low. And it's important to note that the evaluation of criteria strongly depends on the aims of ontology and the choices made into regard to its implementation. A good ontology doesn't perform equally well with regard to all criteria. And the competency questions. The last validation considers the answer to the competency questions. The competency questions are user-oriented questions corresponding to a scenario of use. They allow to scope the ontology and specify its requirements. Some of them are listed in the defined in this table. For example, first one is what are the different types of wines? What material the wine is made of? And the class is wine material, and relation is wine is made of material. And all of competency questions have been satisfied. For example, the question 6, what are the Chinese and English terms of wines? And this slide displays its translation into Sparkle. And the result. Let us also note that in regard to our objectives of classification and terminology, the TOTS ontology will cover the domain in the sense that each individual clearly falls under a concept classification, and each concept is clearly defined as a unique combination of essential characteristics is terminology. And the following parts focus on the TOTS ontology. The TOTS ontology is in open access at this URL. And it's made up of 21 axioms. For example, everyone's one is everyone's, and everyone's has accompanied some handle. And the TOTS ontology includes 165 classes and 11 object properties and 8 data properties and 132 individuals. The 165 classes are structured into 9 top-level classes to represent function, material, and components. And of course, 34 classes were needed to represent the different types of Chinese ceramics of the Ming and Qing dynastics to classify into the right classes the 132 individuals. And for example, the material class, different materials are the essential characteristics of vessels, such as bronze, glass, silver, glass, gold, jade, wood. We define them as classes in order to specify them if necessary. And in order to be precise enough, we define them as disjoint. And the domain and range, and 11 object properties were needed to represent the relationship between individuals. For example, the domain of the belong to is emperor, and its range is the dynasty class. And the domain of has a component relationship is the class resource, and its range the class component. And this slide shows the thought ontology in polygy. Let us take the example of Everwise 1. Then it designates the concept Everwise square mouth, slanting shoulder, body belly, square foot. And the corresponding concept is an OWL class named Everwise 1. The class Everwise 1 is formally defined as a subclass of Everwise, and of the property restrictions corresponding to the essential characteristics, either in heritage or own. Thus, the concept denoted by the term Everwise 1 is represented as the subclass of Everwise has a component some square mouth, has a component some square foot, and so on. The terms in Chinese and in English denoting the class its Everwise 1 are represented as annotation prefix-label on the class using the prefix-label property. We use the score's definition to represent the definitions of term in Chinese and in English. The definition of the term is based on the formal definition of the concept. Everwise 1 with the square mouth, slanting shoulder, body belly, and square foot. Web and dictionary. And the website relies on a broad server structure. In order to reduce the technical difficulty for humanists, we adopt HTML, CSS, JavaScript to develop the website because many humanists don't know the Java and Java. So we use JavaScript to parse our ontology, which actually increase the difficulty of our work. And the ontology correspond to the data layer, which provides domain knowledge for e-dictionary. The website includes 5 functions. Ontology and e-dictionary are 2 main functions. And the website is accessible at this URL. It gives access to ontology and the e-dictionary of terms used in the domain in Chinese and in English. And the complete RDF file can be downloaded from the Thesis. And we have used the JavaScript to parse the thoughts ontology and get information from the dictionary. On the left, every term corresponds to a class in ontology, and the information of a class is displayed on the right. For example, terms in English and Chinese, and essential characteristics and individual. And conclusion and future work. Last, I will summarize my work and introduce the direction of my future work. and the objects of this work have been successfully achieved. Tao Ci defines the concepts in the domain of Chinese resource of the Ming and Qing dynasties. We have achieved the 5 objectives. First, bridge an existing gap by building an ontology to represent knowledge in the Chinese ceramic vase of Ming and Qing dynasties and publish this open link data on the linked open data cloud. Second, build a bilingual Chinese and English terminological knowledge-based dictionary of Chinese ceramic vase for archaeologists and students. 3. Enrich existing methodologies of building domain ontology by means of a term and characteristic guided approach, so as to reduce the dependence on logic and formal languages. Fourth, provide a reference for archaeologists, knowledge engineers, ontology engineers, and terminologists working on this domain. Fourth, propose an approach for translating essential characteristics into pedagogy. And future work will focus on 3 tasks. And the first one concerns the ontology dimension. We will complete the Tao Ci ontology by considering other types of vessels such as jia, bowl, and cup. Linguistic dimension, we will import the onto next level model to enrich the linguistic dimension information. Core ontology, we will propose a core ontology of ceramic vessels based on the Tao Ci ontology and the Lexon project. And thank you for your attention. Last but not least, I wish to gratefully acknowledge again the founding of the China Scholarship Council, my supervisors, and the experts who were consulted. I'm at your disposal for any questions you may have. Thank you very much.